I'm in the Barnes & Noble parking lot, and I haven't been to a brick-and-mortar bookstore in about a year maybe, so hopefully I can go and get one book and leave, but we'll see how that goes. Hey Parker, it's January the 9th, Friday, and I was successful. I've read the first chapter, but I reserve the right to withhold judgment until I get at least halfway through the book. It seems promising so far, but withholding judgment. In your video yesterday, you mentioned poetry, and might I recommend, if you enjoy poetry, spoken word. I was never able to get into poetry much, just because school-assigned poetry typically wasn't my cup of tea. Of course, this all changed when my friend, who is a big poetry geek, pretty much forced me into poetry club. Don't get me wrong, I enjoyed it in the end, including getting the chords for it. But at the beginning, I just never understood why people could enjoy it. And then she turned me on to spoken words. Wikipedia defines spoken word as spoken word involves performance-based poetry that focuses on the aesthetics of wordplay and storytelling. It is often a collaboration and experimentation with other art forms such as music, theater, and dance. With spoken word, it was the raw aspect, because many of the current spoken word poems and contests that go on relate so much to what I'm going through. I can't connect to a man from, say, the 1800s, but a teenage girl going through much of the similar feelings of doubt and self-consciousness, that I get. I'll link some of my favorites in the description. I helped run about 3 or 4 spoken word contests at my local school. I'm pretty much a behind-the-scenes person. My one exception to the poetry is basically a genre off limits for me is Sylvia Plath. Again, the same friend who got me into poetry club, her favorite poet was Sylvia Plath. Another thing that drew me to Sylvia Plath was again the raw emotion that I could feel in her poems sometimes. Specifically Daddy, Another thing that really drew me to Sylvia Plath was the raw emotion she could convey in her poems. Specifically in a poem called Daddy, which I will again link in the description. This is again a very controversial poem because it uses the Holocaust as a descriptor and a metaphor for her. Daddy was one of the poems written shortly before Sylvia Plath's suicide. And now a lot of people say upon first reading that it is more of a confessional poem, but many of the people who really read in depth into her stuff say it's more of her telling a story, and it's not necessarily about her and her father. When Sylvia introduced the poem on radio, she stated that it was When Sylvia Plath introduced this poem on the radio before its first reading, she stated that it was written in third person about a girl with an Electra complex, which is basically the entire opposite of an Oedipus complex, in which it is between a girl and her father. Basically, this poem seems like it would be Freud's dream to analyze. Another thing that is so perfect about spoken word poetry is I can directly see through the person's actions what mindset they're going through as they read through their poem. With a poem just written on a sheet of paper, I can't necessarily see what mindset the author was going through. With spoken word, I can see on their faces what they were going through, or what emotions they were feeling as they wrote it. I'm not discounting the interpretive benefits of having a poem without any of the author's emotions being able to be played out visually, but I like the context clues. In the end, spoken word just seems like one of the purest forms an author can get their point across. Their voice, their tone, the words they choose, and the way they choose to inflect them. There's just something so incredibly direct about it, where you feel like a real connection between the artist and yourself. I know I rambled on quite a bit in this one, but if you enjoy poetry, I highly recommend trying to get into some spoken word, because it opens up a whole new door for a whole new medium. I'll see you Monday, Parker. DFTBA.